Yeah, hi guys. I'm often reading on the Facebook forums that people are asking, have you fitted a sat-nav to your bike and how did you fit it and do I have to take the tank off for the wiring, etc, etc. So I thought you might be interested in how I tackled mine. But before I do that, I'm just going to spend just a couple of minutes talking about sat-nav, so just fast forward if you're not interested in this. So first of all, what did I fit? I fitted a Garmin XT, which you can see is this sat-nav here. I used to have, on my previous bike, I had a BMW Navigator 6, and this is just leaps ahead. Really, I guess there's only two choices, that's TomTom or a Garmin. And I can't really comment on the TomTom because I don't know anything about them. I've been using Garmin's for around about 15 years. And the reason I always went with Garmin is initially the TomTom certainly was not as good as interfacing with the computer. So if you have a Garmin, it's much easier to plug into the computer. At least certainly it was back in those days, 15 years ago. Maybe it's different now with a new TomTom. But if you want to record routes and things like that, and in my day job I do have to do that sort of thing. So I'm always plugging the sat-nav into the computer so I can see where I've been, etc. I also like to download routes. So the choice being Garmin or TomTom, but of course there's another choice, and that's mobile phones. In my view, we're not yet ready. I know a lot of people are going mobiles and what have you, but in my view we're not yet ready for mobile phones for a sat-nav device. My son laughs at me, he thinks I'm just ridiculous using a sat-nav, but if you use a mobile phone, number one, the screen's not bright enough in the sunshine. They also overheat. If they're left out in the sun, they overheat. I don't think they're as user-friendly as a sat-nav because they're not purpose-built for navigation. And then finally, there's still problems with this vibration, and I know there's various mounts now that don't vibrate, but I've still heard horror stories of cameras being ruined, expensive phones, and they ruin the camera. So whatever. Anyway, I prefer a sat-nav. The only disadvantage with Garmin is that Garmin's software, which used to be map source, that wasn't bad. Then they switched to Basecamp, and Basecamp is woeful. It's just terrible, in my opinion. It's very, very difficult to get to grips with. And when you do get to grips with it, if you leave it for 2 months, you come back to it, you've forgotten everything you got to grips with. So I use a software called My Route app, and that works seamlessly, very, very easy. There's a free version and a paid for version. I actually have the paid for version, but for a couple of years or a year or whatever, 18 months, I used the free version. Anyway, that's enough about that. So that's what I do. I use a Garmin. It's a Garmin XT, which is tablet quality. It's really, really good sat-nav. Expensive, 350 quid or something, but really good. So how did I do the install? Well, my install was a little bit expensive because when you buy the XT, you get this business here. But I had used that because on my other bike, because I got rid of the BMW one and put an XT on. So I had used this mount here for mounting on the BMW. So I had to buy another one of those. And I think they're about £15, something like that. Maybe check a link there, but you have to buy that. Then I also had to buy the cable as well, which I'll show you in detail the install of that. So you have to buy the cable, which is a bloody fortune. I'll put a link up. Here you go. Here's a link to the mount. There you go, and there is a link to the cable. So you have to buy those two things. You have to buy those if you're moving a Garmin XT from another bike onto this bike. And then it's about mounting it on the bike. How do you mount it on the bike? When you buy the XT, you do get a clamp which would clamp onto the handlebars here or here. That doesn't gel well with me particularly because I don't like stuff on the side. I'd rather have it in the middle and have it all uniform, what have you. So then I thought, well, I'll make a bracket to put into the middle of between the handlebars. Then I came across Evotech. Now I know I sung the praises of Evotech in my last video when I was talking about that tail tidy. You'd think I work for them the way I'm always praising them, but I don't work for them at all. But they make a mount for this, which I'll show you now in detail, and it's £45, and I thought, oh, ouch, you know, £45. But then when you start thinking about making it and making it to the quality that they've done it, it would be difficult maybe to do it. Yes, you could do it cheaper probably, but it wouldn't look as nice. So anyway, I went for Evotech. So how does it work? Well, there's not a lot to it, but what you do is you get these spacers. First of all, these bolts are replaced. These are Evotech's bolts, and they're longer bolts. So you put the spacer in, and then these two arms along here onto that backing plate there. I'll just point to that. Yeah, that backing plate there, which, oh, bloody horse is always interrupting. And then the mount bolts onto that. And the reason why I like it, if I can just mount that, and if I can mount that with one hand, yeah, there we go. When that's on the bike, you're sitting on the bike round about, I'll just see if I can replicate the view. That's the sort of view that you get. Evotech have got it absolutely spot on. Yes, maybe the indicator, the little green lights are hidden, but they're not really. They're sometimes, you know, there have been occasions where I've left the indicator on. Admit that, but because that's covering. But they've got it really spot on. It's very difficult to replicate the view. Yeah, there you go. That's what you're seeing. So you see both the clocks, really easy. You see the sat nav. Hold on. There you go. That's the sort of view you get. As I say, Evotech, in my view, have got it absolutely spot on. As an aside, you'll see I've got no security device on here, so I've got no ability to lock the sat nav onto the bike. And the reason for that is that I think people go a bit OTT on these locking devices because I think they're all pretty useless. Either they look horrible, they're great big chunky things, or they're not really that strong, and a good yank and you'd have the sat nav off. So my take on it is that if I'm on tour and I'm sitting in a cafe, like outside a cafe right opposite the bike, obviously I'm not going to take the sat nav off, I'm going to leave it on there. But overnight or going off for lunch somewhere, well, every time I leave the bike, I just take the sat nav off, and I've got a case for it, and I just put it in my pocket or on the top box or in my bag or whatever. So I'm not really bothered that there's no security device on there. So this is how I did the wiring. You'll see from the bracket there, I just went out and underneath the handlebar clamp there. This wire's tight under there, but not tight so it's pinching, it's loose enough there. And then I came down here, you can see I cable tied it here. This is a bit boring, this, isn't it, really? And then down through there, round underneath in between the fork there, and then this little lump of plastic here. What I did to feed the wire is I undid this, and that pivots here on where my finger is. There's some sort of plastic, I don't know, rivet, whatever you want to call it there, and this whole panel then just folds forward. I couldn't get this out in order to take this panel right off, but it does fold forward and then exposes all these wires. And then I lifted the tank up by just taking those two out of there and these two here either side. Why didn't I take the tank right off? Because these things worried me a bit. I think they're almost glued on, or the lubricant that they put these on with is gone hard and stuff. But I attempted to take one of those off, but those breather pipes, but couldn't. So anyway, I thought, well, I'm not going to take the whole tank off. But if you release that, it enables you to lift the tank quite, you know, like quite high here. I think I put something underneath here, and then you can follow the wire underneath here. You can lead it under here. There you go. You can see the wire here. That's the sat nav wire. Under here, just cable to put the odd cable tie on. Came through here, underneath there, and then you can see it coming up here. That block, incidentally, is part of the sat nav cable. Don't ever remove that, because I understand that's what that cable tie is doing there, holding that. There's a big sort of lumpy square thing that takes the voltage from 12 volts from the bike down to 5 volts for the sat nav. The sat navs run on 5 volts, at least that's what I think, and so that's what that does. Then this is attempt number 1, because I'm just about to change it all. You see, I came up here, and then I bought, oh, that's cable tied there. I bought this, I bought that plug there, that from Halfords, for about £3, and then soldered those there. I don't know if that's just focusing there. Yeah, soldered those onto the sat nav wires. Well, that was attempt number 1, until one day I was pulling this out. You don't really need to take it out, you can just leave it in, because this only comes on when the ignition's on, so it's perfect. It all works perfectly. But this was in quite tight. I pulled this out, and then look, this whole thing came out. So I then got to thinking that if you take all this off, then you can undo those and undo these here, and do away with all this lumpy thing. Now, you're not going to get your weak shop under there, but you are going to be able to have a little bit more room, because it does, this big chunky thing does take up a lot of room. So then the next thing was, how was I going to connect to this? Out of the back of the cigarette socket here is this little plug here. So I admit to struggling to take this apart. It was a bit embarrassing, really, because I don't know if you can see this well enough. Yeah, there you go. You can see those little tiny clips there, and I was messing about with those, trying to undo those. There's another one on the side, there's one there, and I thought, how do you do all 3 together? Until, let me just get your screwdriver. Good old YouTube or the internet or something. But that there is the little clip that you lift up, that little one there, where the screwdriver is. Yeah, you lift that up, and then the whole clip comes apart. So let's just do that. Yeah, okay, so there it is apart. So then what I needed was one of these to plug into this here. That's connected to the bike. That's giving you 12 volts on ignition. And in order to do away with all this gubbins, I needed one of those. On the Facebook site, Simon Freeman mentions in the file section that you can get them from WeBike, and you can, but they're about $22 by the time, $22 or $23 by the time you ship them. So with a bit of, there you go, I managed to find this on eBay, and that is off a Honda CB500 or something. I'll put a link, there you go. You can see the link now. And some Polish chap sells them for £5 or something, £5 or £6. Yes, he does charge for shipping, but they weren't $23, they were a bit less than that. So now I've got to solder that, cut off all this gubbins that I bought from Halfords,
which I wish I hadn't bothered with. I wish I hadn't been quite as hasty, because I really don't want this thing in there. Now I'm going to solder that, cut those and solder those two together. These two from the sat-nav. I've always been a little bit frightened of soldering until I, again, good old YouTube, watched a few YouTubes, and so far I'm not the prettiest in the world, but they do seem to stay together and I haven't had any issues. I've had some soldered wires on my other bike for a long time without any problems, so I'll show you how I tackled a job if you've never done it before. Unfortunately, I've got to do it on the bike, because if I had to take these wires off the sat-nav, it means rerouting everything, moving the tank, the whole bit, which I'm not going to bother with, so I'm going to solder it in situ on the bike. So I'll just get ready to do that. There we go, that's ready for soldering. I tell you, it's like something off a medical program, isn't it? You know, when they're going to operate on somebody and they just leave the little bit exposed. Well, I guess if I'm going to show you how I do this, I'd better show you all the steps. So what I do is I get the wires. I say, I don't know if this is the right way, but this is what I do. I get the wires and I spread them out like that, and you can see the plug here. I've spread the wires out like so. Exactly the same. Also, I've already stuck my heat shrink on. That's an easy one to forget, and it's really annoying if you do that. So I've put a bit of heat shrink on. Don't be tempted to go too small with the heat shrink, because by the time you've soldered that, there's usually a bit of a lump of solder, especially if you're a bit of a well, I won't say bodger, but I'm not beautifully, you know, my soldering's not beautifully smooth. There we go, you can see that nicely in focus. Anyway, okay, so now I'll just twist these together. Can't really show you how I do that, but I just stick them together and then twist them. I'll show you in a second. So here we are, looking at the other angle. There you go, you can see how I just twist them together. They don't have to be holding very tight, but as long as they're meshed together. You'll see this little gadget I had for years and years, but I've seen them on eBay. But my God, they're useful for stuff like this. The only thing is the jaws on either end. You see, I put a bit of heat shrink around them because they were just a little bit severe. They've got some teeth on them. But anyway, next thing is to get the soldering iron out, put a little bit of flux on there, and then put the solder on using, if you can see that, just some regular soldering flux. God knows where I got this from, I've had it years. You do not want to get this on your clothes, it just burns through clothes. That's even too much on my finger there. You just need a little gentle bit on there, like so. You see how much I put on there? Yeah, hardly a little gentle bit, but still, never mind, that'll do. And then the next thing is, I'm not going to be able to film this because I'm not going to have, I need more hands. Cheap old soldering iron from Screwfix, about £7 or something. And you pick that up, and then the big mistake people make, I think, is they try and melt the solder. Here's the solder in my hand, just a roll of solder, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the soldering iron and touch the bottom of that joint and wait till it gets hot, wait till I see the flux going a little bit liquid, then I shall tap the solder on the top of the joint and it'll flow across. So in other words, I'm not going to try and heat the solder, I'm going to heat the joint. And that, oh, I wish it'd stay in focus. There we go. Anyway, I'll give it a go. And there you go, that's it now, all soldered. So all I've got to do now is put the heat shrink on that and heat that up, but I won't do that until I've done the other side, the black one, which I'll do now. So you can see now that I've soldered them both, and before I put the heat shrink on, I'll just test it and make sure the sat nav works. And yeah, there you go, it's working. Come on, warm up. Yeah, that will warm up in a sec. Actually, that's a little bit of a lie, because it didn't work when I connected it up. And there you go, it's all firing up now. Why didn't it work? Because that plug, as I said, was for a Honda, and it looks like that Kawasaki, I should have really clocked this, but Kawasaki must have the positive and negative in a different way to Honda. So what I had to do was disconnect these wires, which is pretty simple. You just put a little pin down these and they pop out, and then hook one, put the positive in this side and the negative in this side, and it worked. So, but it didn't work first time. But you'll see I haven't put the heat shrink on, because you don't want to put the heat shrink on until you know that it's all working. And then what I always do, I'll show you, I just get a bit of silicone. Yeah, so I've just got a bit ahead of myself then, because I've already put the heat shrink on that side. What I do, it doesn't look pretty, there you go, is you lump a bit of silicone on there. Now, I don't know whether it's a good thing, but it certainly can't be a bad thing, because it's just another line of defense against moisture. I know you've got the heat shrink on there, so the chances of any moisture getting up there is pretty slim, but it's just another line of defense. So then I'll slide the heat shrink over that side and then get the hot air gun on those. So there you go, all sorted. So now all I've got to do is tidy these up, put that plug down there, and I've got a whole load of space there. As I said, not for your weekly shop, but you've got quite a bit of room there for something if you wanted it. Puncture repair kit, something like that. That's it, we're done. I hope you found it useful.